As I said, my name's Roy Illsley. I'm the Chief Analyst at Omdia. And we've heard a lot this morning about the cloud and cloud security. And what I want to do is I want to dig underneath the skin a little bit of the cloud, because it's just used as a pretty much generic term. People say the cloud, but what do we mean by the cloud, and what does that mean for the different workloads and applications? Before we start, just one slide to let you know who Omdia are. Omdia was formed in 2019 from the merger of 4 analyst firms: Heavy Reading, Tractica, Ovum, and IHS Markets. And we're a part of the Informa Tech division. So if you don't know Omdia, you might know some of our other brands in Informa Tech, such as Black Hat and Data Center World. They're events that we run and we put on for enterprise customers. So we support enterprises with intelligence and insights, as well as vendors. If you need to know more, you can reach out or find us on the internet. When I start presentations, I like to start with something that I'll come back to at the end. And again, this morning we heard very nicely about AI. And Guy in his presentation mentioned ChatGPT. And there's been a lot of press speculation about ChatGPT, how wonderful it is. Well, if you go on and use it, and I did last week when I could finally get in there, and I asked it the same question on 3 separate occasions about cloud services in AWS. And I just simply asked it, is this a SaaS, a PaaS, or an IaaS? And I got 3 different responses from ChatGPT. So it's not fully mature, and it's not going to change your lives in 2023. What will change your lives in 2023 is the embedded AI that companies are building into their software solutions and their infrastructure, because that is there to enable you to do more with less. It's freeing up the skills and resources you have by taking on the vast amount of information that's coming in from these systems and doing a good job at getting rid of all of that noise and focusing you in on just the key elements you need to be focused in on. So what I'm going to go through is I'm going to look at some specific data relevant to EMEA. I'm then going to look at some of the management challenges that cloud brings. And then I've got 3 2023 trends in cloud. You've already heard one, and I'll expand on that one a little bit more. And then finally, I'll wrap it up with my views on how IT needs to transform to operate in this new world. Oops. There we go. So, public cloud is what most people mean when they talk about cloud. And if you look in the EMEA market, 62% of the public cloud market is concentrated in 3 of the hyperscalers: AWS, Google, and Microsoft. But that's increased from 58% last year. So what we're seeing in the public cloud space is a concentration of the focus. But that doesn't show the full picture, because cloud is not a zero-sum game. People are not spending on cloud and not spending on premises. So the other 38% of this market that's not covered by that in terms of the public cloud is a challenge for them, as is the edge, and as is other reasons that these hyperscalers can't deliver services that meet the needs of customers. The bottom part on here I'll come back to in a few slides' time, because this is an important thing that in the management challenges we're now discovering people are actually waking up to the fact that they've got to report on their carbon usage and their environmental sustainability. And while the messaging of these hyperscalers has been, we're green, we buy 100% renewable energy, that doesn't tell the whole story. So when it comes to cloud, the fastest growing form of cloud computing is hybrid cloud. Now, just to make sure we're all on the same page, Omdia's definition of hybrid cloud is you have an on-premise capability that connects to the public cloud. And your application can either run on premises and then burst into the public cloud as it needs resources, or it can be written so some of the activity is in the public cloud, such as the front-end customer access points, and the back-end transaction processing is done on premises. So that's what we define as the hybrid cloud. And then currently, that's a one-to-one relationship. So what you've got is, if you're using AWS, your on-premise will connect into AWS. Making it multi-cloud, which we'll come on to in the next slide, is something people want to do, but currently there's too many restrictions to make it viable. Now, the approach to hybrid cloud has traditionally been done in two ways. There's a hardware approach and there's a software approach. And the hardware approach to hybrid cloud is where you have infrastructure on premises that's been provided by the cloud providers. Think AWS Outposts, Azure Stack, Oracle Cloud at Customer. That sits on your premises and connects into their cloud perfectly. But the problem is that that is an extension of the cloud on premises and you have very little control over it. You've got very little flexibility and it's just the cloud, but you've got something to look at in your data center. The software approach is where the control plane sits in the public cloud and the on-premises infrastructure sits in your data center, which you buy and run. And as long as that infrastructure is accredited and supported by the cloud provider, you can run that approach. And that gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of using your relationship with your OEM suppliers to say, I want that infrastructure, I want to buy hardware from Sangfor, I'll install that and connect it up to the public cloud that way. But the public cloud, as much as we've heard it's growing, which it is, when you dig under the surface of it, it's not growing completely everywhere. In EMEA, the growth in public cloud is being driven by large enterprises. Between 2022 and 2024, we're expecting to see their use of public cloud increase by 3%. But over the same time period, mid-sized enterprises are reducing their use of the public cloud by 2%. And if you look at this through the lens of the workloads, you also see another different picture. So databases, for example, are going to increase on premises, but they're also increasing in the public cloud. So database spending is increasing in general in both spaces. AI, by contrast, is being done much more on premises. It's going to be moving from 11% to 15% by 2024, whereas in the public cloud, it's fairly flat. And then on the other hand, CRM is moving off on premises into SaaS. So the message from this is really you have to look at the public cloud as, yes, it's that big, but for you, what does it mean? Dig underneath the covers and look at it by workload, by application type, by industry, and by country, because they are all showing slightly different pictures of how it's being adopted and why it's being adopted. Then we come on to multi-cloud. Now, multi-cloud is something that most organizations found they had by accident. They'd either acquired companies or a department had gone off and used this cloud and somebody else had used that cloud. Over the last couple of years, CIOs have been taking this and going, right, we now need to make a strategy for how to use multi-cloud. And as you saw in the previous slide, the workloads that are being moved are an example of how they're doing that. Because they're looking at where is the best place to run this particular workload? How is it best served giving me? Am I going to use on-premises, hybrid cloud, going into one public cloud? Am I going to use multiple public clouds? Currently, as of 2022's data, 44% of EMEA organizations are using 2 or more public clouds. That is up from less than 30% in 2021. So this shows there is an appetite in EMEA for multi-cloud use. And this is not a surprise because I'm from the UK, and the UK financial regulators have a mandate that says if you want to operate in the cloud, you've got to have 2 cloud providers. Now, I had an argument with AWS about why this is, because AWS's position was, well, we've got availability zones, so if you lose one data center, we've got another data center that you can use. My point to them was, but that's not what the financial regulators are saying. They're saying that you need 2 suppliers, not just 2 data centers. That is a part of the risk management and why multi-cloud is being adopted by many more people. There we go. Now, when you come to the hybrid cloud, there is a new entrant in the space, and this is the on-premise IaaS capability. Now, this came about because under the previous model I discussed, where the hardware vendors, the OEMs, were selling you the equipment and you were connecting it into the cloud, what customers were finding is, well, I've got a consumption-based model in the cloud, but I'm actually buying my infrastructure, which is fixed on premises. The OEMs finally realized that they could actually sell their infrastructure on premises with some extra capacity built in a consumption-based model. So the customer is now using its hybrid cloud in the same way, or paying for it in the same way as it would be doing for the public cloud, which makes much more sense in terms of managing how you deliver things. And in fact, although the OEMs were late to this game, because AWS Outposts and Azure Stack were out much earlier, we are predicting that by 2025, the OEMs will be accounting for almost 60% of this market, because customers prefer the flexibility and agility of buying from an OEM than having the cloud extend into their on-premise locations. So now let's talk about some of the management challenges that this new world brings to us. And I said I'd go back to that first hyperscaler cloud. The hyperscalers have been saying how good they are at being green. If you run in our cloud, you don't have to account for your carbon emissions because we use 100% renewable energy. And at the time that the calculations were being done, that was a very true statement. But today, a lot of work has been done on scope 1, 2, and 3. And people now understand more that actually you've got to account for building the infrastructure. So how did the data center get built? How did the servers get built? How were they shipped? How are they being disposed of? Not just the running costs of the cloud. And when you look at all of those calculations will increasingly come into the calculations that enterprises will be forced to do to demonstrate that they're reducing their carbon emissions over the coming years. And that's why the cloud providers will be scrutinized much more closely. And their messaging about their being greener than on premises might not be true in your case. So you may find that your data center, the way you buy your hardware, if you add all that supply chain carbon emissions up, is less than somebody like an AWS. The other thing we found on this is organizations have a disconnect. Their senior management is saying, we're doing X in the cloud, but their data center operators have got that down as priority 9 or 10 on their list. And this is because internally, we don't think organizations have got the right structures in place to force the environmental management better. And that's something that you're going to see improvements in. You're going to see roles and responsibilities tuned to doing this coming in this year and next year. But one of the most important things that people do when it comes to cloud and management is the efficiency. Because during the pandemic, there was a peak in people moving workloads to the cloud. In about 2018, according to our data, something like about 25% workloads were running in some form of public cloud. In the peak of the pandemic, that hit 50%. It's fallen back from that value. And it fell back from that value primarily because people realized that the cloud was different and its costs weren't necessarily as cheap as they were led to believe. Because the cloud is like having teenagers. They never switch the lights off. They never switch their PlayStations off. They never switch their tellies off, despite you telling them. And that adds up the cost in the cloud. Because if your developers come in on a Monday morning and start up their instance for their development and start up their test environment, and then disappear off at lunch, come back, do some more work, go home, come back the next day, you'll find the instances and environments have been up and running all night, but not being used. That's a cost that you pay. The cloud providers will tell you about it, but they're not bothered that you're not doing anything with it. It's up to you to change those behaviors. And that's where Cloud Ops and FinOps came in. Organizations realized they needed to change the behaviors and disciplines of people in their company to use these resources much more efficiently and effectively. And they needed tools to manage it and get the observability of it. But doing that is difficult because, as we've already heard, we heard from Will, social engineering is a challenge. And particularly in EMEA, and this relates mostly to the Western European economies, such as Germany, France, and the UK, where they have got very difficult organizational and labor-intensive laws that mean you can't just change things overnight. Germany, for example, has the Workers' Council, and the Workers' Council sit on any strategic decision that organizations make, and if they don't like the sound of it, they can delay it and argue against it. So getting change in Western Europe is difficult. In other parts of the world, we're finding Cloud Ops and FinOps is adopted much quicker. And it's adopted quicker because they can make those changes faster to the working practices. But it's not all about just the cloud efficiency. It's also about the fact that today we've got a lot more environments. Going back 10 years, you had legacy monolithic applications or virtual machines. Well, today you've got containers, serverless, WASM, microservices, hybrid applications. All these environments have got workloads running in them at different stages of development and at different stages of production. And what this slide is just showing is that in the EMEA region, when you look at it by sub-region, you can see the differences in terms of who's investing in what type of environment. The reality is that people are investing in all types of environment. So you have suddenly gone from having VMs and legacy to having 5 or 6 different software environments that you need to manage in the cloud and on premises. And what's more, you've got to optimize these for spend, resource usage, and now carbon efficiency as well. So this whole task gets much more complicated. And that's where we come back to the opening statement about the embedded AI. Because the embedded AI is what's going to help deliver this. Tools like AI Ops, Cloud Ops, and FinOps will be using intelligence built in to look at all that data and make smart decisions. The decisions that can be made fast and efficient and timely, so you can make changes at that time if you have your cultural issues and people issues sorted out. And one of the other things we found was the spending that organizations are doing reflects this in 23. Now this is net spending. So this is those people that said we're increasing spending minus people that said we were keeping it flat or we were decreasing spending. And this was 2022's data. This survey was run at the beginning of 2022. This year's survey is currently out in field, so I haven't got that data. But back in January, we were predicting that staff spending was going to be cut by about 16%. And unfortunately, our predictions were true. If you look at all the tech giants' layoffs in the US over the last year. But spending on tools and investment in AI-enabled tools is increasing. And the reason it was increasing was to cope with the layoffs. Because as they were laying people off, they got less people to do the work. The tools were taking up the slack and doing this work for them, so they could do more with less. And this level of efficiency is something that CIOs are now honing in on. And you heard from the security aspect, automation is key. You can hire as many people as you want, but you won't keep them. But if you automate, you can deliver the job. Well, it's the same with running an efficient cloud, whether that's a hybrid cloud or whether that's a public cloud. The tools will help you deliver that, and that's why the investment is heading in that direction. So I now want to come across and bring across some cloud trends that you're going to hear about in 2023. 3 of them will be reality. 1 of them you'll hear a lot about, but it won't make reality. So the trends are the edge cloud, the vertical cloud, the sovereign cloud, which we've heard something on already, but I've got a slightly different take on, and the Uber cloud. Now the Uber cloud, or super cloud, or mega cloud, or call it what you want, is the evolution of the cloud. Just like the hypervisor changed the fact where you could use resources on the infrastructure by combining different manufacturers and using the resources to create a virtual machine, the Uber cloud will be where you can build services on top of the primitives of the cloud providers. So you will use the database in one, you will use a service in another, you will use a service in a third, and deliver that to your customers. Now, currently, that's not possible. There's lots of little issues with delivering that. But there's some startups coming out of different parts of the world that are working on developing specific solutions to do certain things in this space. So they are ones to watch, because that is definitely a technology that will be on your agenda in 24 and 25, but it's watching how it matures that I would suggest in 23. The edge cloud. The edge cloud is going to evolve along use case lines. And that is because each use case is going to be slightly different. So if you're in retail, you will probably be using edge cloud for a couple of different reasons. One, you could be monitoring video so you can free up people to not watch people scanning at the tills to see if they're skip scanning, missing items out and paying less for their shopping. Or you could be using it to make smart mirrors so people can stand in front of a mirror and see themselves in different outfits. The requirement for that is different to the requirement in manufacturing, where the video would be looking at a streaming output from a production line, and as soon as it detects a fault or a flaw in that production line, stopping the production line so you don't waste production line quality goods. They all have different needs. So some will want more compute, some will want more storage, some will want faster networks. In certain cases, these edge devices will be 10 meters up a pole. In others, there'll be 3 or 4 racks of servers and storage in boxes stored in a field. Managing those is going to be a challenge, but in the industry sector, you will find the ecosystems that are developing for that sector will be developing based on those use cases. Vertical clouds are another aspect that you'll hear a lot about. Now, there's only one true vertical cloud, and that's the US government's federal public sector has a separate building on a separate network where its public cloud is housed. But everybody else, and apologies if there's certain countries that do the same thing, but there's none that I know of, but most other industries will be using the same resources in the same data centers as everybody else. What a vertical cloud is, or an industry cloud, is it's an ecosystem of partners with tools specific to that ecosystem, enabling them to develop solutions for the particular challenges of that vertical. And that is going to expand. You're going to see more of that as people go to market with their vertical clouds. But they're not distinct separate clouds, it's just a logical construct. So bear that in mind. Then we come on to sovereign cloud. And as you heard, sovereign cloud is more than just data residency. You've got data residency, you've got data processing, then you've got data privacy. Now, when I started investigating sovereign cloud a couple of years ago, it was very, very much the EU against the US Cloud Act. The US Cloud Act gave US law enforcement the right to say, I want Roy's email that's on that server in Paris that he sent to somebody else, and it's running in AWS. And the US law enforcement would be obliged to give whichever US law enforcement agency wanted it, my email from Paris. Now the EU and most other people around the world thought, that doesn't sound very fair. That's not very nice. I'm not an American citizen, why do you want my data? So the idea of the sovereign cloud in the data privacy layer is to make sure that it's processed and stored in Paris, but it's actually run by French people. And there's an air gap to the Cloud Act. That's what the sovereign clouds are being built. And that's why the cloud providers are struggling to build these sovereign clouds, because they can't put those clouds in every country. And that's why you're seeing the concentration on 3, but that's why you're seeing that edge use case grow. These are just some examples of very recent data protection laws that different countries have announced. There's many, many more. I got this from our data regulation team, who have got reports on every country's data regulations. So I just pulled out some of the EMEA ones here. So, to wrap up, I've got 2 slides. Firstly, if anybody watches UK television, you'll know what I'm talking about with this. This is the name of a television program about property and property development. And it's all about location, location, location. In other words, you can have the nicest house, but if it's in the wrong place, it's not going to sell. That's the same with your resources. Your resources have got to be in the right place for your needs. And that may mean in a hyperscaler's public cloud data center for workloads you don't care about. But increasingly, it will mean being in a data center that's within country, being processed in accordance with local laws. And that's something that you need to go to regional partners to get. And that's the regional partners need to acquire the infrastructure that can run that and connect it back. And finally, as I said, 2023 is the year of doing more with less. And it's going to be a balance. It's going to be a balance for CIOs of using their internal resources, using the cloud services, and using trusted external partners. There's going to be no magic formula here. It's going to be down to you, your needs, what you want. Omdia's analysis agrees with what IDC showed you and what Sangfor have showed you, is managed services in security is a rapidly growing business. because lots of organizations don't have the security skills to do that. So they are acquiring the managed services to do it. But they're not alone. There's other areas that people lack support in as well. Just about up on my time. So thank you very much for listening.